I'd like you to look at a photograph that I took at the Marriott across the street from the New Orleans Convention Center a couple of years ago. And I'd like you to examine this picture carefully. In particular, I'd like to see if you find something notable about it. What I mean by that is, if you got in this elevator and saw this panel, is there anything about it that you might notice and maybe mention to a friend who was on the elevator with you? At this point, I'd like you to pause the video, examine the photo as much as you need to, write down your answer, and then resume the training video. Okay, I hope you have something written down at this point. Now, let me caution you again. If you're only passively engaged in this course, and you didn't actually do what I asked you to and really look at the elevator panel and look for something notable, well, this course isn't going to do you nearly as much good. Active engagement is necessary to get all the parts of your mind involved in assimilating the concepts. And that means both the left side, which analytically understands some of the definitions that we talk about, and the right side, which puts the concepts to use in the real world by pattern matching. Now, let me guess what you wrote. Based on using this example many times over the past 2 years, I have seen that 80 to 90% of developers will notice the same thing, that there's no 13th floor. Now, that's absolutely true. There's no question that that's the case. And in fact, you'll see this in many hotels, especially in cities that have casinos in them. Turns out that a lot of their guests don't want to stay on the 13th floor. However, that's most assuredly not why I took this picture. A few others might notice that the alignment of the buttons is a little bit whacked. Now, we're going to get to that later because it's certainly another valid point. In fact, this elevator panel exhibits a lot of bad design, which is why I like to use it as an example. At this point, though, I'd like to zero in on the one thing that did cause me to go back to my room and fetch a camera to take this picture. It's right here. That's the placard for the ground floor. Notice that the paint on the letter G is worn off. Now, you may have mistakenly believed that the placard is actually the button to press to get to the ground floor. That's a completely natural mistake. I know it's a natural mistake because from the worn off paint, I can confidently assert that dozens or hundreds of people a day make that very same mistake. Now, that example, that worn off paint, that's an example of something a trained designer will see because it unambiguously shows a problem with a design. That one signal will start a designer down the path of analyzing the design to see its flaws. So why do people press that placard? Well, there are several design principles involved in that explanation. First, I'd like to look at the one I consider most important for this particular case. At a casual glance, that placard looks like a button. Why? Well, because it's round. Buttons in the real world have been round for hundreds of years. All you have to do to verify that is look at the nearest button shirt. Only in technology do we tend to use rectangular buttons. Elsewhere in the world, most buttons are round. Notice that a lot of appliances have round buttons. And in particular, almost all elevator panels have round buttons for the floors. So the round shape suggests a button to the typical person that's getting on an elevator. This is an example of a design principle known as archetypes. In the real world, there are certain universal forms that we just grow to expect. We expect elevator buttons to be round. So if we see something on an elevator panel that's round, we tend to leap immediately to the conclusion that it's a button. Now, in this case, of course, it's not, but it takes a careful look to see that. But remember, people are not constantly looking carefully at the things around them. Remember what we discussed in the first module. People don't necessarily see a lot of detail if they're not looking for it. They glance, they form conclusions, and they take actions very quickly. It would be tedious and time-consuming to do it any other way. So if we mislead them with bad archetypes, we raise their error rate. Now, they're more likely to blame themselves than to blame anybody else, but I don't consider them at fault. I blame the designer who led them to make the mistake with poor design.